All right, I want to just tell you right now, we're talking about swatches. I know, I already hear the groans, but we're gonna try to make this fun, nonetheless. I feel like there's like some topics that just divide knitters and crocheters, fiber folks very quickly, and that is swatching. Doing them, not doing them, are they necessary, blah, blah, blah. And I will admit, although I am a believer in swatching, it is one of the less satisfying parts of the knitting process. And even I have a tendency to want to just rush through it and get to the fun part as quickly as possible. The problem is, when we are rushing, we often develop bad habits. And those bad habits, when it comes to swatching, leads to swatches that lie to us. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and let's discuss our bad habits when it comes to swatching. As we get started, quickly, I want to just quickly tell you part of the reason why I am such an advocate for swatching. And it's not just experience, although experience is most of it. It's also because of my experience of going through the Knitting Guild Association's Master Hand Knitting Program Level 1. Never finished it. I did all the swatches, I did all the research, I just didn't finish the writing, and I sort of lost interest in completing the program. But I learned a lot from it, glad I did it. And one of the things I learned in it was sort of like the details of swatching. And somewhere in this video, I'm not going to tell you where, I'm not going to timestamp it, but somewhere in this video, I am going to share how the Master Hand Knitting Program requires you to measure your swatch. And it's, I think, a really useful method. So keep an eye out for that in the video. If you're like, I don't care, I just want to skip around anyway, there are still timestamps down in the description box. As always, my videos, I always put in timestamps, so you can skip around if you want. And also down in the description box, you will find the list of materials and resources I think are useful from today's video. Some of these may have clearly marked affiliate links, so if you click on one of those links to do some shopping, I might earn a small commission, and this does help support my channel. So if you utilize one of my affiliate links or you leave me a tip through Buy Me a Coffee or a YouTube Super Thanks, thank you so much for helping support my channel and keeping me here on YouTube. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get into the bad habits. The bad habits to break. Okay, we're gonna just jump right into the number one bad habit. We're not gonna mess around. I think we all know what it is, all right? If you wanna jump into the comments real quick and tell me what you think the number one bad habit is before I say it, feel free. But I think we all know what the number one bad habit is, and that is not swatching at all. Yes, it is so tempting. It is so tempting to not swatch, and I admit this is the bad habit I am most guilty of myself. I think there are some items, like shawls, where maybe fit doesn't matter so much, or that are really small, like socks or gloves or hats, where the amount of time spent just knitting the project and finding out if the gauge is right or not is equal to the amount of time of actually gauging it. And so I might as well just start. Yes, those situations absolutely exist. But when fit does matter, okay, or I really want to hit the size of something, that little voice in my head going, do you really have to swatch? Do you really want to swatch? Maybe we don't swatch. That little voice, I go, sit down, we're swatching. And even the project here up on my mannequin today, this is the Playdate tee. I will link to it down in the description box below, but this tee, I'm so glad I swatched. Both of these swatches I made for the Playdate tee. This is a DK weight yarn, which the pattern calls for. And this yarn is too light for the gauge in the project. So I auditioned a second swatch. I love this yarn. I've worked this yarn in other projects. This is a little bit heavier actually than this yarn. I don't know if you can tell. This yarn is a little bit heavier than this one. And I was like, this one will work. This one I'm just so confident will work. Didn't work, still didn't work. Obviously, you know that because my Playdate tee is not a beautiful teal. It's a beautiful mauve. Or do you say mauve? You tell me, do you say mauve or mauve? I've always said mauve. Mauve, mauve, mauve. Suddenly that sounds so weird now that I've said mauve. I'm so glad that I just took the time to do this swatch and then took the time to do this swatch and didn't assume that just because both of these yarns are DK that they would end up working for this project. To summarize, if you care about the size of the project meeting what the size of the project in the pattern is, work the gauge swatch. Just take on the attitude that knitting the gauge swatch is in fact starting the project and embrace the swatching process. Just embrace it. When I first was getting into the knitting game, lo, these many, many years ago in another millennium. Yeah, when I was first learning how to knit, it was very common to see people who would make a swatch that was just like 1 inch by 1 inch big.
It's pretty uncommon to see these days. Most people are going to knit a swatch that's at least 4 inches by 4 inches or 10 by 10 centimeters.
But I got some bad news for you as well. Not just a bad habit, I got some bad news for you. Casting on to make a 4x4 gauge swatch, probably also not big enough. Yeah, you actually need an even bigger swatch than that. So I'm gonna bring this swatch back out. This is gonna just be our pretty little swatch to look at because it's kind of a pink day. We got the pink mauve, we got purple and pink, pink, pink. We're doing the pink today. Anyway, the stitches that are on either vertical edge and on either horizontal edge, those stitches, they're not good representations of our average tension. We want to throw out the stitches that may be throwing off our averages. And so our most average tension is going to be in the middle of the swatch. So we need at least 4 inches in the middle in either direction to properly measure the swatch. So I personally aim when I'm doing gauge swatches to go for a swatch that's going to be at least 5x5 or 6x6. That's my goal. And that way I know my swatch is plenty big enough for me to have a good area in the middle of the swatch to measure. Since we're talking about measuring and gauge swatches, I'm going to tell you now how the Master Hand Knitting Program instructs people to do a gauge swatch.
And it's interesting because it doesn't rely on just counting the stitches within 4 inches of the fabric.
All right, it involves some scrap yarn. So got some scrap yarn here. I'm gonna need 4 bits of scrap yarn. So what we're gonna do is we are going to weave in this scrap yarn at the border of where we plan to measure.
On a flat swatch, I'll usually weave in about 3 stitches from the edge. On an in the round swatch, I usually will weave in the yarn a 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the edge.
So now I have marked out this area in the middle.
And I'm going to measure the distance between those 2 lines and then count the stitches.
So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10,
20, 24, 25.
So I have 25 stitches at 4.5 inches, okay?
Now we have to do some math to compare our stitches per inch in the gauge swatch versus the pattern. We're going to divide the number of stitches, 26, by the length between the 2 threads, 4.5, and we get
5.777778 stitches per inch. And now I have an ultra precise calculation of how many stitches per inch that I have.
However, 5.7777 to infinity and beyond is not a practical number.
So I'm going to round down slightly to 5 3/4 stitches.
And now I can compare that stitches per inch in my gauge swatch to the stitches per inch in the pattern and see how close I am.
Now you might be going, why don't you just round up or down to the nearest half stitch? Well, we're going to explain that in the next bad habit. When we're measuring our gauge swatches, even if you're not using this method and you're just counting like how many stitches there are in 4 inches, which honestly, that is what I do most of the time. I just wanted to share this so that you kind of see what that process looks like to be like ultra precise. But oftentimes, even if we're measuring 4 inches, we'll have an extra half stitch or there'll be an extra quarter stitch. And it can be tempting to just round up to a whole number from there, but you really shouldn't. You should count at least every half stitch, but even every quarter stitch can give you a more accurate gauge. And honestly, it's math, because if you discount that little bit of extra stitch in your stitch count, you can throw off your gauge. And it's simple math, and I'm gonna math it out for you.
Let's say the gauge is 20 stitches per 4 inches. So we divide 20 by 4, and that gives us 5 stitches per inch.
Let's say you have to cast on 50 stitches. We divide that by 5, and that means that those 50 stitches, you should have 10 inches of fabric when you're done.
But what if our stitch count was actually 20.5 stitches per inch?
Well, let's math it out. First, we need to figure out how many stitches per inch that is. So we're going to divide 20.5 by 4. That's 5.125 stitches. Does that extra 1.25 stitches per inch matter? Well, let's find out, okay? We're going to take our 50 stitches and we're going to divide that by 5.125. And that's going to equal 9.75 inches.
So our fabric, which was supposed to be 10 inches, is now 9 3/4 of an inch.
Your fabric is going to be narrower, and you're going to be like, why is this so much more narrow? Well, it's because you discounted that half stitch in your count. It was just 5.125. That was the difference. So it does matter, okay? It does. That little bit of extra does matter. When I, again, was a younger knitter, I'm going to talk a lot about all of my bad habits from when I was young, because that's when I didn't know any better. Especially when I was younger, one of my favorite things to knit were hats. I was always knitting hats, and I would swatch for a hat oftentimes, and my hat would be too big or it'd be too small, and I'd be like, I don't understand. Like, what is happening? Why are my hats always ending up so big? Is my head that small? Am I not able to measure my head correctly? And the answer is no. I did measure my head correctly. My mistake was I was knitting flat swatches instead of knitting swatches in the round. This is not true for everyone, but for most people, your tension for when you knit flat, at least in stockinette, will be different than what your tension is when you knit in the round. And there's actual physics behind this. Oftentimes, people's purl stitches are a little looser, and that's because when you do a purl stitch counterclockwise, which is the standard way that people usually learn how to do their purl stitches, it's the same direction that you wrap the yarn in when you do your knit stitches. In the purl stitch, the yarn actually has to travel a little bit farther around the needle than in the knit stitch, and so their purl stitches end up a little looser. And the thing about that slightly looser tension is for a lot of knitters, it's so small, it's barely noticeable, right?
But the difference is big enough to affect your gauge.
The upshot of all of that, for the purposes of swatching, is that when you are swatching something for an in-the-round project, you should also swatch in the round so you are getting an accurate gauge swatch for in-the-round knitting versus flat knitting. The challenge of that is knitting in the round to be able to get a solid 4 inches to measure, right? Usually requires a pretty large piece of fabric. Some people get around that by going ahead and just knitting a hat as a gauge swatch, but there's another option if neither of those appeal to you, and that is to do a simulated swatch in the round, and that's what this swatch is. But all a simulated swatch in the round basically is knitting 1/2 of your circumference and then leaving a long float in the back. I know, trust me, I know. This looks like it's wasting so much yarn having these long floats in the back. These long floats in the back is less yarn than if I had knitted a whole swatch in the round and gotten this size swatch to measure. So I have a whole video about how to do a simulated swatch in the round, and I will link that up here and down in the description box below if you want to check that out. And I have found this method works really well. I have far more success with my swatches when I'm working in the round projects, like the Playdate tee. And yeah, this is a great method and it works really well for me. So the number one bad habit of swatching is not swatching at all. This may be the second most common bad habit, which is not washing and blocking your swatch. You see it all the time on the intertubes. There'll be somebody who comes on very frustrated because they I did a gauge swatch and then I knit the project and it's the wrong size and what's going on. And the more experienced knitters, crocheters, what have you, will always ask, did you wash and block your swatch? And oftentimes the answer is no. Why would I do that? I unraveled it as soon as I finished this. I swatched it, I measured it, I unraveled it. Generally, if this is your typical process, if this is what you normally do, it is kind of a bad habit. Almost always, not always, but most often, patterns, when they give a gauge, that gauge is based on a washed and blocked swatch. Just like a swatch is meant to give us an idea of what our average tension is, the swatch is also going to look at what the finished fabric is going to be. And for most designers, the finished fabric is based on after it's washed and blocked. It's considered part of the process. I know there are people out there, I can hear them in my head already. I never wash and block. I think that's whatever. They have their reasons. Again, I'm not judging, at least not out loud. I'm gonna be honest, not the blocking part, because blocking can mean different things, and this is not that video, but the washing I judge a little. Your hands have oils, your hands have dead skin on them. They're gonna get on the yarn. The yarn is rolling around. When you are done knitting a project, that fabric is not clean. But the other reason though with the washing and the blocking is that washing and blocking, just washing, forget blocking, okay? Because blocking can mean so many things. Just washing the fabric, laying it out flat, just that can affect the finished gauge. You can end up with a different gauge than before the washing, which means that you should wash and block your fabric according to how you plan to wash and block your project, okay? So there it is. Those are the bad habits when it comes to swatching, and I would love to hear from you. Do you agree with these? Do you not agree with these? Do you have your own bad habits that you see when it comes to swatching? Are some of these ones that you go, oh, maybe I need to rethink that? If there's anything around gauge swatching and how to make an accurate one that you have questions about, I am going to recommend my video on how master knitters get an accurate gauge swatch. Again, I'm going to link that up here and down in the description box below. In that video, I go through the whole process of making an accurate gauge swatch, from casting on, binding off, washing, blocking, doing a hang test, measuring. Everything is in that video. So if you do have a bad habit that you have found in this video today that you want to break, I highly recommend my own video. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If so, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your other fiber wrangling friends. Liking, sharing, commenting on videos are all ways that help support my video and really lets YouTube know to recommend me to more people so I can keep growing this channel. I have a goal this year. I really would like to hit 10K this year. It's a very big stretch goal, but I really would love to do that. So anything you can do to help boost my visibility on YouTube would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Yes, I am Becky. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you might be enjoying this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye.